The sun was blazing hot, hanging high in the sky like a giant ball of fire. The streets buzzed with life, hawkers shouting about their goods, buses honking as impatient drivers tried to push through traffic, and pedestrians moving quickly, trying to escape the heat. Cindy wiped the sweat off her forehead as she hurried along the sidewalk. She was late for her afternoon shift at the Monarch, the high-end restaurant where she worked as a chef. It was one of the best in the city, owned by the powerful billionaire, Nicholas Carter. The rules there were strict, and lateness wasn't tolerated. If she didn't make it in time, she could lose her job. She quickened her steps, focused on getting to work, when something caught her eye. A woman sat by the roadside, hunched over under the scorching sun. She looked tired and lost. Her wrapper was dusty, and her blouse stuck to her skin from the heat. Her hands trembled slightly as she wiped her forehead, and her eyes, filled with exhaustion, searched the crowd as if hoping for someone to notice her. Cindy hesitated. She was already late. She needed to keep moving, but she couldn't. Her conscience wouldn't let her walk away. She stepped closer. "Good afternoon, Mama. Are you okay?" The woman looked up, her face filled with relief. "My daughter," she said in a weak voice. "I am stranded." Cindy frowned. "Stranded?" The woman nodded. "I came from the village to see my son, but my phone was stolen at the park. I have no way to call him, and I don't know anyone here." She sighed, looking away. "I haven't eaten since morning." Cindy's heart ached. She had little money herself, just enough for transport and maybe a snack before work. But how could she leave this woman here, hungry and helpless? Without thinking twice, she reached into her purse and pulled out some money. "Come, Mama, let's get you something to eat." She led the woman to a small roadside food stall, bought her a plate of steaming rice and beans with fried plantains, and handed her a cold bottle of water. Cindy sat beside her as she ate, watching the relief wash over the woman's face with every bite. Cindy knew she had to leave soon, but something didn't sit right with her. Where would this woman go after eating? She had no money, no way to call her son, and no place to rest. "Mama," Cindy said softly, "do you know where your son lives?" The woman sighed, shaking her head. "I only know the area, not the street name. And without my phone, I have no way of finding him." Cindy bit her lip. She couldn't leave her here, but she also couldn't take her to work. Then an idea formed in her mind. "Mama, my house isn't far from here," she said. "It's small, but it's safe. You can rest there while I find a way to reach your son." The woman looked at her, surprised. "You would do that for me?" Cindy smiled. "Of course." The woman's eyes glistened with gratitude. "May God bless you, my daughter." Cindy guided her to her modest home, a small one-room apartment, but it was clean and comfortable. She fetched a clean sheet, spread it on the bed, and gave the woman a glass of water. "You can rest here, Mama. I have to go to work, but I'll find a way to reach your son," Cindy promised. The woman took Cindy's hands in hers, squeezing them gently. "Thank you, my child." Cindy smiled, then quickly grabbed her bag and rushed out the door. She had no idea that the woman she had just taken in was Evelyn Carter, the mother of her billionaire boss, Nicholas. Cindy rushed through the busy streets, weaving between pedestrians as she tried to make up for lost time. The sun was still high in the sky, beating down on her with an almost cruel intensity. Her clothes clung to her skin, and sweat trickled down her back. She was already late. By the time she reached the Monarch, her heart was racing. Taking a deep breath, she smoothed her apron and stepped inside, hoping to go unnoticed. No such luck. "Cindy!" She froze at the sharp voice of Mr. Andrews, the head chef. His arms were crossed, his expression hard as he stared her down. "You're late," he said, his tone leaving no room for excuses. I don't want to hear it." He waved a hand dismissively. "This is not some roadside stall where you show up whenever you feel like it. This is the Monarch. If you want to keep your job, start acting like it." Cindy swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. "Yes, sir. It won't happen again. See that it doesn't." Without another word, she rushed to the sink, washed her hands, and took her place in the kitchen. The evening rush had already begun, and orders were piling up. She grabbed a knife and got to work, chopping vegetables and preparing sauces with quick, practiced movements. She was finally starting to settle in when a voice, sharp and laced with cruelty, cut through the air. "Oh, look at this place. Still filled with low-class workers, I see." Cindy's stomach tightened. Sophie, Nicholas Carter's fiancée. Sophie loved coming to the Monarch, not to eat, but to remind the staff that she was above them. She wasn't just rude, she was cruel, treating the workers like they existed only to serve her. She entered the restaurant like she owned it, her designer heels clicking against the tiled floor. With her perfectly styled hair and expensive dress, she was the kind of woman who enjoyed making others feel small. Cindy kept her head down, hoping Sophie would ignore her. She wasn't that lucky. "You," Sophie said, her gaze locking onto Cindy like a predator spotting its prey. "The one with the ugly apron." Cindy clenched her jaw, but forced herself to stay calm. "Yes, ma'am?" Sophie smirked. "I want coffee. But not just any coffee, the one Nicholas drinks. The imported one from Brazil." Cindy hesitated. "That coffee is kept in Mr. Carter's private." Sophie raised a perfectly manicured hand. "Did I ask for an explanation?" She narrowed her eyes. "Get it? Now." Cindy bit the inside of her cheek. The special coffee Sophie was demanding was locked in Nicholas's office. Only a few people had access to it, and she wasn't one of them. But Sophie didn't care. She never cared. When Cindy didn't move fast enough, Sophie's lips curled in amusement. "Oh, and while you're at it, my shoes got dusty on the way in. You can polish them when you bring me my coffee." A few waiters nearby shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared to say anything. No one ever challenged Sophie. Cindy felt her face burn with humiliation. But she needed this job. So she nodded, forcing a polite smile. "Yes, ma'am." Sophie grinned. "Good girl." Cindy turned to leave, but before she could take a step, Sophie grabbed the front of her apron, yanking her back slightly. "One more thing," she said sweetly, her tone dripping with mockery. "Make sure you serve it to me personally. I want to see the look on your face when you realize that women like you don't belong in places like this." Cindy clenched her fists but kept her expression neutral. As she turned toward the back, something caught her attention. The restaurant manager was speaking urgently to Nicholas Carter. Cindy couldn't hear everything, but she caught enough words to send her heart into a spiral. "Your mother. Missing since this afternoon." Cindy's breath hitched. Missing? Her mind flashed back to the frail woman resting in her apartment. She had found Evelyn Carter. Her grip tightened on the counter. Nicholas's face had darkened, his usual calm expression gone. His voice was cold and sharp as he turned to his security team. "Find her. Now." Cindy's chest tightened. She needed to get home. But before she could move, Sophie's voice rang out again. "Where's my coffee?" Cindy clenched her jaw. She was trapped between two storms, one that could ruin her career, and another that could change her life forever. Cindy's heart pounded as she hurried to the back of the kitchen, her mind racing. Nicholas's mother was in her house. The same woman he had just sent security to find. She needed to leave. But before she could even take a step, Sophie's voice rang out again. "I'm waiting, chef," she said, tapping her manicured nails against the counter. "Where is my coffee?" Cindy swallowed hard. Of all the times for Sophie to demand her attention, it had to be now. She forced herself to turn around, keeping her face as neutral as possible. "I." Sophie raised a brow. "You what? Did your tiny brain already forget what I asked for?" Cindy bit the inside of her cheek. She wanted to snap back. She wanted to tell Sophie that she had far bigger problems than her stupid coffee. But she couldn't. Not when she was barely holding on to her job. So instead, she forced a smile. "I'll get it now, ma'am." Sophie smirked. "That's more like it." Cindy turned quickly, making her way toward the staff hallway. But instead of heading toward the break room, she slipped through the back exit. The moment she stepped outside, she took off running. The streets were still busy, the heat still thick in the air, but Cindy didn't care. She weaved through traffic, ignoring the honking cars and shouting vendors. She had to get home before Nicholas's men did. When she finally reached her apartment building, she was gasping for breath. She ran up the steps, her pulse racing as she unlocked the door. "Mama," she called out, stepping inside. The elderly woman stirred from where she had been lying on the small bed. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. "Ah, my daughter. You're back." Cindy exhaled in relief. She was still here. Still safe. She walked over and knelt beside her. "Mama, I have something to tell you." The woman smiled warmly. "What is it?" Cindy hesitated. "Your son. I think he's looking for you." The woman's expression changed. "He is?" Cindy nodded. "I heard it at work. He has people searching the city for you." The woman sighed, looking down at her wrinkled hands. "I knew he would be worried." Cindy reached for her hand. "Mama, do you remember anything about where he lives? Anything at all?" The woman was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. "There is a big black gate, and a tree in front of the house. And the house has a red roof." Cindy's mind worked quickly. That wasn't much, but it was something. If Nicholas's men were already searching, they would find her eventually. And if they found her here? Cindy didn't want to think about what would happen. She took a deep breath. Mama, I think we should go to the restaurant. Your son might be there. The woman studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, my daughter. Let's go. Cindy helped her up, grabbing a shawl to wrap around her shoulders. Then, together, they stepped out into the evening air. By the time they arrived at the Monarch, the atmosphere was different. Tension hung in the air. Security guards stood at the entrance, their eyes scanning the crowd. Cindy spotted Nicholas near the entrance, his jaw tight, his phone pressed to his ear. His usual composed expression was gone. He looked worried. Cindy's stomach clenched. This was it. Taking a deep breath, she turned to the woman beside her. Mama, that's your son. The woman followed Cindy's gaze. The moment her eyes landed on Nicholas, something flickered in them. Recognition, relief, love. Before Cindy could say anything else, the woman stepped forward. Nicholas. The billionaire stiffened. His head turned sharply toward the voice. The moment he saw her, his entire expression changed. For a split second, pure shock crossed his face. Then in a blink, he was moving, striding across the restaurant, pushing past his security team. Mama. His voice was hoarse, as if he didn't believe what he was seeing. The woman smiled. My son. Nicholas reached her in seconds. He hesitated, almost as if afraid she wasn't real, then gently touched her shoulder. Are you okay? What happened? Where have you been? I am fine, she assured him. A kind girl helped me. Nicholas's gaze shifted, and for the first time that night, his eyes landed on Cindy. Cindy held her breath. For years, she had worked at the Monarch, but she had never spoken to Nicholas directly. He had never looked at her the way he was looking at her now, like he was seeing her for the first time. You, he said, his voice calmer now. You helped her? Cindy nodded. Yes, sir. Nicholas was quiet for a moment, studying her. Then, something in his expression softened. Thank you, he said, his voice sincere. Cindy blinked, surprised. She had never expected gratitude from a man like Nicholas Carter. But before she could respond, another voice cut through the air. Oh, please. Sophie. She had been watching from a distance, her arms crossed. Now she stepped forward, her expression full of irritation. Can we stop with this emotional nonsense? She rolled her eyes. We found her. Great. Can we move on now? Nicholas turned to her, his expression unreadable. Sophie sighed dramatically. Honestly, I don't see what the big deal is. It's not like she was kidnapped. She was probably just wandering around, being careless. Cindy's stomach turned. How could someone be so heartless? Nicholas's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. Sophie huffed and turned to Cindy. And you, she sneered, looking her up and down. You should be grateful you were able to help. Maybe now, you'll get a tiny bonus or something. Isn't that what people like you want? Cindy felt her fingers curl into fists. She had never hated anyone the way she hated Sophie at that moment. But before she could speak, Nicholas did something unexpected. He turned to his security team. Take my mother home. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. Make sure she eats and gets some rest. The guards nodded and gently guided the woman toward a waiting car. Then Nicholas turned back to Cindy. What's your name? Cindy blinked, caught off guard. Cindy, sir. Nicholas nodded slowly. Cindy. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, he did something that made Sophie's face twist in disbelief. He gave Cindy a small smile. A real smile. Cindy stood frozen as Nicholas held her gaze. She had worked in the Monarch for years, and not once had she exchanged words with the restaurant's powerful owner. He was distant, unreachable, someone who existed in a world far from hers. But now, he was looking at her in a way that made her breath catch. He had just smiled at her. And judging by the way Sophie's face twisted with disbelief, it was something that didn't happen often. Sophie's sharp voice shattered the silence. Nicholas, are you seriously standing here wasting time on this? She gestured at Cindy, her tone dripping with disdain. Kitchen girl? Nicholas didn't even glance at her. Instead, he spoke to Cindy. You took care of my mother. Cindy shifted uncomfortably, not used to this kind of attention. She needed help. Nicholas nodded, his expression unreadable. And you gave it without expecting anything in return. Cindy frowned slightly. Should I have expected something? That made something flicker in his eyes, almost like amusement. Sophie, meanwhile, looked like she was about to explode. Oh, this is ridiculous, she scoffed. Nicholas, this girl is nothing. She's just another lowly worker who... Nicholas finally turned to her. That's enough, Sophie. Sophie blinked, momentarily thrown off. What? She asked, laughing nervously. I'm just telling the truth. Nicholas's expression was calm, but there was something in his tone that made Cindy shiver. You could learn something from her. Sophie's smile faltered. Excuse me? She didn't have to help my mother, Nicholas continued, ignoring Sophie's growing anger. She didn't have to take her in, feed her, or make sure she was safe. But she did. And she did it without asking for a reward. He turned back to Cindy. That says a lot about a person. Cindy felt her face warm. She wasn't used to being praised, especially not in front of someone like Sophie. Sophie, on the other hand, was seething. I cannot believe this, she hissed. You're actually standing here defending a chef over your own fiancé? Nicholas's gaze darkened. Respect is earned, Sophie. For a moment, Sophie just stared at him. Then she let out a short, bitter laugh. Oh, I see what's happening here. She folded her arms, tilting her head. You feel indebted to this little girl, and now you think she's some kind of saint. She rolled her eyes. You're being ridiculous. Nicholas didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied her for a long moment before finally saying, I think I'm just finally seeing things clearly. Sophie's face paled slightly. What is that supposed to mean? Nicholas didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Cindy. Do you have a moment? Cindy hesitated, glancing between him and Sophie. Sure. Nicholas nodded and started toward the side entrance, signaling for her to follow. Cindy hesitated for only a second before trailing behind him, leaving Sophie fuming in the middle of the restaurant. Nicholas led Cindy to a quieter section of the building, away from the eyes of curious staff and customers. He turned to her, crossing his arms. Tell me the truth, Cindy. Why did you help my mother? Cindy frowned at the question. Because she needed help. Nicholas studied her, as if searching for something. That's it. Cindy tilted her head. Should there be another reason? Nicholas let out a small breath, shaking his head slightly. You'd be surprised how many people would have walked away. Cindy shrugged. Maybe, but I wouldn't. Nicholas was silent for a moment. Then, in a softer voice, he said, Thank you. Cindy blinked. Nicholas Carter, one of the richest men in the country, was thanking her. She cleared her throat. I didn't do anything special. Nicholas gave her a look, like he knew she was downplaying her kindness. You did more than you realize. Cindy shifted awkwardly. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. She had expected to be scolded for being involved in something beyond her position. But instead, Nicholas was standing here, thanking her like she had done something extraordinary. Before she could think of what to say, Nicholas spoke again. I'd like to repay you. Cindy's eyes widened. Repay me? Nicholas nodded. You took care of my mother. Let me do something for you. Cindy shook her head quickly. That's not necessary. I didn't help her because I wanted something in return. Nicholas's lips twitched slightly, almost like he was impressed. I know. That's exactly why I want to do something for you. Cindy hesitated. Like what? Nicholas thought for a moment, then asked. Do you like working here? Cindy blinked at the unexpected question. I mean, it's a good job. But do you like it? Cindy hesitated, then sighed. I love cooking. But the way we're treated here, she shook her head. It's not easy. Nicholas nodded, as if he already knew that. How would you feel about a promotion? Cindy's head snapped up. What? Nicholas smiled slightly. You have talent. And after tonight, I know you have a good heart. I want you to take on a bigger role here. Head pastry chef. Cindy's jaw nearly dropped. That was a huge step up. The head pastry chef wasn't just a position, it was a place of respect. A role that came with better pay, more recognition, and most importantly, freedom from the constant torment of people like Sophie. I don't know what to say, Cindy admitted. Nicholas tilted his head. Say yes. Cindy swallowed hard. Are you sure? Nicholas smirked. I don't say things I don't mean, Cindy. Cindy looked at him for a long moment. She thought about how she had started the day, just another tired worker, struggling to make it through her shift, dreading every moment of Sophie's cruelty. And now she was standing here, being offered something she never thought possible. She took a deep breath. Okay, she said finally. Yes. Nicholas's smirk widened slightly. Good. Cindy was still trying to wrap her head around what had just happened when another voice rang out from behind them. Oh, you have to be kidding me. Cindy turned to see Sophie standing there, her face red with rage. Nicholas sighed. Sophie. Sophie stepped forward, her eyes blazing. You're giving her a promotion? Are you insane? Nicholas raised a brow. Are you? Sophie let out a bitter laugh. You're letting some random girl manipulate you with her sob story, and now she's suddenly important. She glared at Cindy. What did you do? Bat your eyelashes at him? Cry about your hard life? Cindy flinched, but Nicholas's voice cut through the tension. I think we're done here, Sophie. Sophie's face twisted. You can't be serious. Nicholas crossed his arms. I'm very serious. Cindy felt the shift in the air. Something was changing. Something big. And for the first time since she had stepped into the Monarch, she felt like maybe, just maybe, her life was about to take a turn she never saw coming. Cindy could feel the tension in the air as Sophie's face turned a deep shade of red. She looked between Nicholas and Cindy like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. You're joking, Sophie finally said, laughing bitterly. You're promoting her? Nicholas remained calm. Yes. Sophie scoffed. This nobody? You're giving her a better position just because she got lucky and found your mother. Cindy clenched her fists at Sophie's words, but she didn't speak. She knew people like Sophie, entitled, cruel, and always looking for someone to step on. Nicholas, however, was unfazed. She didn't get lucky, Sophie. She helped my mother when no one else did. And she did it without expecting anything in return. Sophie rolled her eyes. So what? You're rewarding kindness now. Nicholas raised a brow. And what do you think should be rewarded? Cruelty? Sophie's jaw tightened. Nicholas sighed, rubbing his temples. You know, Sophie, I've been ignoring a lot of things. But I think it's time I stop. Sophie folded her arms. And what exactly does that mean? Nicholas looked her straight in the eyes. It means we're done. Cindy's eyes widened. Sophie blinked. What? Nicholas's voice was calm but firm. This relationship isn't working. You treat people terribly. You think you're better than everyone else, and honestly, I've had enough of it. Sophie's mouth opened and closed like she wanted to say something, but for the first time, she was speechless. Then she laughed, an angry, bitter laugh. You're breaking up with me? For her? She pointed at Cindy, her voice dripping with disbelief. Nicholas's expression didn't change. I'm breaking up with you because you showed me exactly who you are tonight. Sophie's hands curled into fists. You're making a huge mistake, Nicholas. A huge mistake. Nicholas exhaled. Maybe, but at least it's my mistake to make. Sophie glared at him for a long moment before turning sharply to Cindy. I hope you enjoy your little promotion, Chef. Her voice was thick with sarcasm. Because that's as high as you'll ever go. Cindy held her ground. If working hard and treating people with respect means I stay in this position forever, I'll take it. Sophie let out a sharp breath, shaking her head. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the restaurant. Nicholas watched her go before turning back to Cindy. I'm sorry about that. Cindy blinked, still trying to process everything. You just broke up with her. Nicholas smirked slightly. I did. She hesitated. Was it because of me? Nicholas shook his head. No, Cindy. It was because of her. I just finally saw her for who she really is. Cindy nodded slowly, still trying to wrap her head around everything. Nicholas studied her for a moment before speaking again. I meant what I said about the promotion. You deserve it. Cindy took a deep breath. Thank you. He nodded. I'll have the paperwork processed tomorrow. Before Cindy could respond, the restaurant manager approached, looking a little nervous. Sir, do you still want the team to continue searching for Madame Evelyn? Nicholas's face softened. No. She's home now, safe. The manager nodded and left, leaving Nicholas and Cindy alone. Cindy hesitated. Will your mother be okay? Nicholas gave a small smile. Yes. Thanks to you. Cindy looked down, suddenly feeling shy. I really didn't do much. Nicholas chuckled. You say that, but you changed everything. She glanced up at him, meeting his eyes. There was something different in the way he looked at her now. Something warm, something she didn't quite understand yet. For the first time in a long time, Cindy felt like her life was finally turning in the right direction. She didn't know what the future held, but as she stood there, looking into Nicholas Carter's eyes, she had a feeling that this was only the beginning. And for the first time ever, she was excited to see what came next.